Hi, I'm Grady Culhane in the CapeCod.com News Center here for a special segment talking about affordable housing and some local initiatives that are being undertaken by some local organizations. Gail, do you mind just introducing yourself for our listeners?
Sure. I'm Gail Sullivan, and I'm the managing principal of Studio G Architects.
All right, awesome. Now, York, that is an organization that is responsible for several local affordable home projects that are happening mostly in Wellfleet of Lawrence Hill. And then we have the Maurice's Campground effort that we're going to be talking more about as well. You guys recently did an outreach event talking more about that, so we want to dive into the details. Though I was just talking with you off microphone for our listeners, and this was all planned. This interview that we're having now was before Governor Mara Healey just signed into law the Affordable Homes Act. So I thought it'd be fun if maybe I can get some comments from you, some reactions. Essentially, it's a $5 billion effort with a bunch of measures included, including the seasonal homes designation. That's something that the Cape and Islands leaders had been trying to push for a long time now. It means that some towns that have a significant portion of their housing designated as second homes, they're eligible to get access to a $50 million bond authorization for funding affordable housing, funds for public employee housing, increases to residential property tax exemptions for primary homeowners for year-round residents. And that's just a few of the tools that have been highlighted. We're not going to go into all
Yep.
the details now, but just kind of wanted to get your read on that essentially as a developer, as an architect for affordable homes in general. And you've been plugged into this industry for a very long time. So kind of wanted to get your thoughts and see how things might have changed over the years. Yeah, what is your reaction?
Well, it's been a little nail biting given that the legislature waited until the very end of its session, as we all know. So, anyway, we are thrilled. I'm thrilled. You're right, Grady. For my entire career, which has been a while, I've been working on public and affordable and supportive housing. So, this has elements that housing advocates have been working really, really hard on for a long time. So we're thrilled with how comprehensive it is, right? Because, and I don't know all the details of what actually gets signed, but I know there's a portion that's for upgrading public housing in the state. This is enormously needed. There has been very, very little money to upgrade state-owned public housing, so that's great. That will help some Cape communities. There's not a huge amount of public housing on the Cape, but there is some. And then the seasonal, which you mentioned, is hugely important for all the Cape communities, but not just Cape communities, right? So a lot of other communities in Massachusetts, certainly along the coast, but also in the Berkshires, have similar kinds of issues, which is you've got a lot of us who, including me, love to be there part-time, but that also means that it's a burden on folks who live and work in these towns year-round. So to get this designation, to get funding behind it, I think is just an enormous step forward for Cape and Islands and other communities to start to address some of the issues that I know are longstanding, but have really gotten worse and worse over the last decades.
Mhm. Yeah, the Healy administration, I believe, is looking to either produce or this is their words, not mine, produce, preserve, or rehabilitate more than 65,000 units in the next 5 years. Certainly a big number and a small amount of
Yep.
time. So we'll see how that goes. Good luck, and hopefully we can get some of that down here on Cape as well.
Great.
But obviously, we have you on today to talk more about Studio G specific. Studio G Architects, you are guys responsible for quite a few affordable developments now going out in Wellfleet, the Outer Cape in general. And you recently hosted a public event to allow people to kind of see a little bit more about what's been going on.
Yep.
Do you mind telling me a little bit more about how that event went? Some of the stuff you've made some decisions on, maybe the last time we spoke, any kind of new developments that are related to the Maurice's campground. And then we'll also talk about Lawrence Hill, which is under construction this summer
Great.
later as well. But right now, just Maurice's campground. How are things going?
We had a great community meeting. And so just to give your listeners a little bit of background, the town of Wellfleet bought this property. It's 21 and a half acres, bought it from the family that had owned it for 60, 70 years, the Gauthier family, and said the critical thing here is to address the many needs in Wellfleet for housing. So year-round affordable, but also what some people call workforce, some people call attainable, but sort of housing, what often is called the missing middle, people who have jobs, are earning a decent income, but expensive place like the Outer Cape aren't earning enough money to afford to buy a house. So there's a lot of interest, and I'll get back to some of the details of that, a lot of interest in a lot of different kinds of housing. So the town set up a planning committee, the Maurice's Campground Planning Committee, and that committee then was charged with putting together an RFP, a request for proposals, to which we responded and we were selected. So we are the planning team for the town. And I want to make that clear because nobody's been selected to build or develop anything on that site yet. The town is really doing an organized process here of first having this planning study that's on behalf of the town. So this was the first of 3 community meetings. There'll be another one in November and another one in either February or March as we're starting the wrap up of the study phase. And the point of the study is to figure out what are the most important housing needs according to people in the town, and then also a variety of other things. So we have a lot of goals, not surprising. And
Comprehensive.
it is very
Comprehensive is what it is.
comprehensive. So we're also looking at environmental constraints. This site sits adjacent to a stream. So there's riverfront protection, there's wetlands protection, there's also endangered species protection. So we have some ecological constraints. We also want to make sure the development is highly sustainable so that it doesn't burden the towns in terms of its environment, but contributes to it in terms of being energy efficient and resilient. So there's a whole set of goals around that. And then, what's the connectivity? Because as you build a new neighborhood on 21 acres, how does it relate to Eastham? It's very close to Eastham
Yeah.
because it's right across from the cinemas, and to the rest of Wellfleet. So connectivity. So the way we organized the meeting, there were 6 tables and people got to choose which tables they went to. Each was organized by topic. So I just mentioned a few of them. Housing itself was one topic. Community uses and commercial uses on the property was another topic. Sustainability and resilience was a topic. Connectivity was a topic. Reflecting Wellfleet's culture and history was actually another table topic. So you can see sort of these reflect the goals that the planning committee established, and we're trying to make sure that everybody who wants to can participate and have their voice heard on all of these subjects. So that's what we did. And we had about 70 or 80 people attend, which, given an August evening, I'd say that was
Mhm.
kind of extraordinary. We were thrilled. And people were just so great with generous with their thinking and their ideas. People shared a lot of great ideas as well as concerns, and especially at the housing table. Not surprisingly, there were a lot of people who themselves need housing. And so we got very specific individual stories of the kinds of struggles that people are going through right now to find a place to live year round. And this could include town employees. I was really glad you mentioned that from the bill that the governor just signed. So town employees are struggling. Seasonal workers are struggling to find places to live. Employers are buying up property. And on the one hand, that's really critical for them, for their business. And on the other hand, it takes another property off of the year-round market. So, what we're trying to do, as you said, is look at this comprehensively and look at how we can make a difference in several of these arenas on this one property to start to relieve some of the burden that people are feeling, reduce the cost, because once there's more housing, then we could hopefully start to see some reduction in cost. And I think what's exciting about it is we can, on this site, because it's large enough, do multiple things. This is not we're just going to do one kind of thing, deeply affordable, funded by low-income housing tax credits. We're actually envisioning a likely scenario where there are a number of sub-neighborhoods, if you will, and different kinds of housing. And then what kinds of supports for that, right? Like Billingsgate Market now has taken over the old Maurice's Campground Market. I was in there the other day, just, checking out what they had. There's a nice array of food products, both prepared and not, for people. And so how great would it be to live on a site where you could actually walk to a small grocery store, right? Kind of an ideal thing to have. And what other kinds of supports? People have talked about supports for shellfishing folks, right? Who have a lot of equipment that has to get stored, for instance, and maybe they need some workspace. And that's one of the conversations that came up is, what about some shared workplace? So if there's WeWork for office workers, what's the shared workspace that might exist for tradespeople, for shellfishing folks, so that we can really support the industries that make this a vibrant area?
Yeah, a lot of cultural things that you've been incorporating. And of course, I kind of wanted to mention as well, Gail, I found this out actually during our previous conversation. But yeah, you are kind of local to the area. So it's interesting to
Mhm.
have you walking into the convenience stores as well and kind of checking that stuff out. And you've been able to see the involvement of the drive-in theater area as it's also the flea market and things like that right across the street. Very interesting kind of cultural impact there. Now
Yeah.
as well, so 21 acres again, that was the
Yep.
size of the campground. Yeah, it's a lot to work with. So the idea of multiple miniature neighborhoods within it is a very interesting concept unto itself. I imagine a lot of this is just going to be like a back and forth with the town as well when it comes to
Yep.
like what we're able to zone essentially. Yeah, I guess you got a lot of feedback now. So what are the next steps? Is this going to be consolidating into kind of a document for the town, or are you going to make some recommendations? What's the follow up now?
All of that, but there's still more process. So actually, one of the
Oh, okay.
plugs I want to make is for anybody who couldn't attend the meeting, people can participate online. They can go to wellfleethousing.org and access sort of the digital equivalent to the community meeting. It'll have all the same information that we shared at the community meeting. We did a bunch of posters that had information and asked people for their feedback, and lots of notes of what people wanted. That was one of the most fun things to see. So people can do the same thing digitally. And that'll be open until I believe it's September 9th. So into September. So people have time to participate. Once we've got all of that, we're actually already starting to compile it. We're compiling all the notes from the meeting, looking for what are the threads of commonality, right? So what are the points, the needs that are identified by the most people, right? Those need to rise to the top. And part of what we're doing, our team includes Boston Communities, which is a developer and development consultant, and they will be helping with the financial feasibility of these options. So we'll start doing a couple of different things now as we're compiling all the ideas and information. We're going to start doing some land use plans. So starting to play around with this idea of how much of 21 and a half acres can we use for housing? What else might we have? We have to deal with wastewater, big issue on the Cape, right?
Hmm.
So one of the great things people may or may not know is Wellfleet has contracted with Eastham to bring a 10-inch water line to Maurice's campground site. That means the wells that currently exist there will no longer be needed, which is terrific. And then we're hoping the wastewater of the new development at Maurice's will for sure have to get taken care of on site. There's some talk that maybe it might incorporate a couple of adjacent neighborhoods as well. So TBD on that. Uh, so we'll do some land use planning, show some options to the committee. I imagine that's going to be a very iterative process. The idea is that in November, when we have the next community meeting, we will be able to show options and also talk about financial feasibility for those options with everybody who wants to attend. And we'll do the same kind of thing then. If you can't come on the evening we have the meeting, there'll be a digital version of that meeting that people can participate in. We really want the most voices possible in this conversation so that nobody feels like they didn't have a chance to participate. It's a really important project, more than one project, really, an important development for the town of Wellfleet, and I think also for the town of Eastham because it's so close.
Yeah. Now, as well, just for people who are interested, we will have the URL as well for the digital online version
Thanks.
in the description for this video, as well as, excuse me, up on capecod.com, for people who want to go and see that in person. Well, not in person, digitally. But for so in general, do you mind kind of highlighting some of the unique takes that people brought to the table, some of the more maybe outlandish ideas, or maybe what was one of the more common concerns? Like, what did you hear from some of the residents without
Uh,
names attached in a
yeah,
free form atmosphere here?
yeah. And I floated that whole evening, so I couldn't even attach names probably to most of the people. But I think a very, very strong interest in home ownership. People don't want to just have this site used for affordable rental housing. I think that was very clear. People want more than one solution to be given. And that might be one of the most overriding things to come out of the conversation. We're not surprised. The committee itself has been talking about that, but it was great to have that reinforced. So people said, yes, yes, of course, we need rental housing that's highly affordable, but we need more than that. And people talked about Habitat for Humanity, for instance, a great organization that's working on the Cape. Might we have Habitat housing? And for people who don't know, that actually involves a subsidy from the town because Habitat's cost to build a house is higher than what they charge when they sell it to somebody. So that gap has to get filled. Um, so that was a very strong interest. Any other options for home ownership? Some of the younger people, and I'm very happy that we didn't just have gray-haired people, that we had younger people participate, and their concern was, I want something long-term, right? I want something in which I can build equity, in which I can raise a family. That was a very big theme at the housing table. I'd say another big theme, again, not surprisingly, people really want this to be notably sustainable, right? So they think that anything that we build new should be highly energy efficient, but also very resilient to climate change, given where the Cape sits in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And so those are things that's great. That's what we do as a design firm. I'd also say that the state energy code requires it regardless. But so these will be super efficient homes, and that's a benefit. And then we're looking for, I was talking a little to the chair of the select board, John Wolf, about this at the end of the meeting. He was asking, what might this mean in terms of zoning? And, should we be having a conversation? I said, yes, but not right now because we haven't got there yet. But also, how does this one property contribute positively to the town's needs overall? Yes, on housing, but his point was on wastewater, right? We have such a nitrogen issue. And so by doing this housing and maybe some adjacent housing on an alternative wastewater treatment facility, it's actually reducing the nitrogen that's going into the saltwater areas around town. And that's a benefit to the community. And so this is one of the things we're looking for, is how does the development here not just not do any harm, but actually help benefit the town as a whole, including people who won't be living on this property.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see this one development being able to reach so kind of far and wide. Now as well, this is something that happened in Chatham, but the affordable that town's affordable housing trust recently closed an offer by a previous owner for in response to a request for proposals, and that was going to be on the condition that it was deed restricted, sold as affordable home. But the town's trustees hoped that that project specifically would be able to serve as a model maybe for some other town property owners who were considering maybe selling their home deed restricted like that. Lack of affordable housing is such a major issue. Do you think that this project is kind of approached that point where it's now getting this community-wide involvement, like being able to be a model for other towns across the Cape, not just Wellfleet? Is that kind of stance you're taking as you're doing these various outreach events?
It's on our minds. I don't know that it's on the minds of all the participants, but I think it's very much on our minds. We are both looking to other towns that are facing similar issues and how are they being resolved. Like, turns out Dennis, we didn't know this until very recently. Town of Dennis has some seasonal housing that's not owned by a single employer, right? And so we're looking at all those models. Provincetown with the barracks project, another model. So we're both looking at models that are in other places, but also, yes, I think the kind of thoughtful planning that the committee is undertaking here is going to be a model then for other towns, because sometimes people don't realize how much planning ought to go into it before you put out a request to developers, because the town is going to want to control to some degree what happens on its properties, right? If the town puts money in, the town should have a right to have some control. And having this planning process is ensuring that citizens of the town have a voice in it.
Mhm.
So I'd advocate that for everywhere.
Of course, yeah, it's a good way to take it. Now, so I mean, it's important to. I imagine that the more robust the planning process is now, then the less estimations or guesswork a contractor has to do in the moment. Like when they come across, like, okay, we need to put something in here. What kind of wall? What kind of pump? What kind of? So I assume a lot of that is coming down to that, where it's like there's a lot of hidden questions that people might not consider when they're building a house. I know I wouldn't. I'm not a
Yeah.
contractor, but it's a very elaborate process. Is that kind of why the planning needs to be so robust?
Well, it won't be down to that level because we won't be looking at, we'll be looking very globally at costs, like how
Sure.
much per unit a certain thing costs, not the construction costs per se. That would be on the developers later. But I think it is trying to set, the way I look at it is this gives the town the ability to set parameters. We want a minimum of this, a maximum of that. That's one kind of parameter. We want a mix of A and B and C and D types of housing, right? So in that way, rather than, for instance, the other way would be you don't do the planning process, you put the RFP out and the developers say, well, I want to do this. And it's based on their thinking about what works, but it might not be based on the collective wisdom of people in the town based on what they know. So we're really trying, this is a crowdsourcing effort, if you will. We're really trying to crowdsource the information and the ideas so that when a developer comes, there's less mystery. It's not so much less mystery about what the construction might cost. It's less mystery about what they're going to propose because the town will have said, this is what we want. And for the developer or developers, I want to say what's good about that is there's more certainty that they will be approved. And the thing that developers hate the most is uncertainty, right?
Yeah,
Going
especially.
into a town and having no idea if people are going to support the project. So if they can come in and say, yeah, okay, we know that they already want this, which was the story with Lawrence Hill, that makes a really big difference. We get through the process easily. That means it's the developer spends less money on it, but it also means the town gets what they want, right? So this is a win-win.
Mhm. Yeah, actually, as well, we're about coming up on time, but I did want to ask a little bit more about like how Lawrence Hill is going in general. That got shovels in the ground already, so I assume you guys are. You're not as your work is mostly done, but yeah, have you had some pride in it? How is that going? Is there kind of lessons that you've been taking from Lawrence Hill, from Maurice's campground? Just a few more comments about how that's going.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, shovels are not yet in the ground.
Oh, my
This
apologies.
that's okay. We are having pre-construction meetings. There are lots of
Ah,
meetings,
that's
but
what
we
it
don't have
was.
a building permit yet, and shovels are not in the ground. So they need a financial closing with all of the funding sources, and we anticipate starting construction actually first of October. And the groundbreaking, this is still being worked out, but groundbreaking is going to be sometime in October when there will be an event. And I'm sure there'll be public notice of that. But we are taking lessons from it, I think, in terms of what people in town liked about the way the site was planned, about the kinds of units, et cetera. So what they like, what they maybe didn't like as much, those are the lessons we're drawing from it right now.
All right, that's awesome. Great to hear as well. There's been some, excuse me, some lessons coming from that as well as maybe what they, and important to know what people didn't like. I notice a lot of people tend to be very forthcoming with what they don't like about a project rather than what they do. But it's great to hear there's been some developments on that front. Now, as well, before we wrap up, I kind of want to ask what it's like, kind of planning and working with a town that has this. For the Cape, it's completely normal, but the town voting system, the town meeting system, where everything has to be approved like that. That is, of course, kind of more unique to this area. Does that factor into your planning going forward? The idea of having to like win over the residents so strongly, not just like councilman or the mayor or whatever it is the representative.
It does, and it certainly is part of why we thought that the really robust community process was critical, that people should not be hit with something like this at a town meeting without having a lot of information in advance, right? And so to go through this process, and then at whatever point that there needs to be a town vote about it, people feel familiar. They know what's going on. They don't feel like they're blindsided. I think that's really critical in any community, but a community that has town meeting kind of forces that issue, I think. So I love it. Wellfleet's my first experience with what I say is definitely on the ground democracy. I love town meeting.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's very unique. It wasn't until I was older where I was like, oh, this isn't just how every town works. And I had friends in college who were like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. You don't have to go. But that's all right. You learn as you grow. All right. Well, that's
Right.
about all the time we have, Gail. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. Is there any final comments or any kind of add-ons that you'd like to throw for our listeners while I still have you? Maybe where they can learn more. Like I said, we'll have the link in the description below
Yeah.
for that URL for people interested in learning more about the
Yeah.
Campground project. But is there anything else you want to highlight for our listeners?
No, I think that's it. Yeah. Wellfleethousing.org. Please check in. Things keep getting added.
All
Thanks.
right, awesome. Thank you so much, Gail. I'm Grady Culhane in the CapeCod.com News Center.